While we're waiting for everyone to find a seat, I'd like to take a few moments and announce the Hartzog Environmental Awards that were presented today. The Benton H. Box Award was presented to Robert D. Bixler for outstanding work by a doctoral student in the area of recreation resource management. Rob Bixler, who now works for the Park Department in Cleveland, did his study on topophobia, or childhood fears of the out of doors. And from his work, he's going to help us in helping those children deal with those fears so they can enjoy the out of doors like all of you, unless you have topophobia, of course. The Benton Box Award was presented to C. Thomas Weich. We add this award to Tommy Weich's many national, regional, and state awards to recognize the efforts that he has done on behalf of preserving the beautiful natural environments of South Carolina. As you know, Mr. Weich is currently very actively involved in putting together a group of people from the private sector as well as the public sectors in hoping to purchase and preserve the Jocassee Gorges area to our west, the last and most beautiful part of our South Carolina wilderness. And our last award was presented to Robert G. Stanton, the Walter T. Cox Award for sustained achievement in public service that provides inspiration and leadership for wise management of our natural and cultural resources. And it is our great fortune to have Director Stanton with us this afternoon. In just August, he was appointed to the Director of the National Park Service. In the meantime, it's been hard to catch him on the phone in his office because he has been out in the field and many times in the southeast visiting the national parks and renewing his acquaintance with all of the many properties now under his leadership. We are very interested. We've heard a lot about the national parks. Our students have read a lot about the national parks in the last few weeks. We're very interested to see your views of working with the national parks and bringing us all into the 21st century. Director Stanton, welcome to Clemson.
Thank you very kindly. A very warm welcome indeed. Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. James, for that very kind introduction. Dr. James, Dean Cheatham, Director George B. Hartzog, Jr., distinguished members of the administration, the faculty of this outstanding university, ladies and gentlemen, and especially a warm welcome and greetings to the students who are with us this afternoon. I hasten to thank Dr. James and the George B. Hartzog Foundation for extending an invitation for me to be with you this afternoon and to be a part of the George B. Hartzog Lecture Series here at Clemson University for 1997. When Dr. James extended the invitation to me, initially via phone, I was a private citizen, a retired public servant if you will. Not an old retired public servant, but a retired servant nevertheless. But today, a very special day for me to be here with you at Clemson University. Truly, I am honored, privileged, and humbled to appear before you as the 15th director of our National Park Service. I'm now entering my 3rd month on the job. After my first 2 weeks, I was called to Secretary Babbitt's office. He said, "Bob, you've been on the job 2 weeks. The honeymoon is over. Get to work." I must tell you how delighted I am to be with my mentor, my counselor, and most of all, my friend, George B. Hartzog, Jr., a native son of the state of South Carolina, the 7th director of the National Park Service, and above all, ladies and gentlemen, a great American. Ladies and gentlemen, George B. Hartzog, Jr. I too want to recognize the delegate to the Southeastern State Park Directors Association who are with us this afternoon. We in the National Park Service enjoy our relationship with the state park directors, for we share many common concerns and objectives in providing for the protection and appropriate use of our nation's resources. I'm also pleased to see that there are many of my colleagues in resources preservation, both at the local, county, state, and national levels. In particular, I am pleased to have my colleagues in the National Park Service with us. I want to assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that they are here in respect and a tribute to George B. Hartzog, not to hear from me, because they have told me without any hesitation, "Bob, we hear too much from you anyway." Certainly allow me to again recognize Dr. James, the faculty and students in Park and Recreation, Resource Management, and Tourism. Clemson University, without question, is a leader in providing outstanding training in these very important fields of study. And many of the graduates of this university are making their marks at the local, state, and national level. It was my pleasure to be on your campus some years ago when I served as the Deputy Regional Director for our Southeast region located in Atlanta, Georgia, to join you here on the occasion to assist in the establishment of your outdoor laboratory. I understand from Dr. James that this facility has developed into a major camping complex for youth with disabilities and a year-round conference and environmental center. I commend you on this magnificent accomplishment. This month, I have visited twice, including today, to South Carolina. I had the opportunity on October the 7th, I believe, to join with Regional Director Belson and Mike Lovelace, Superintendent of Kings Mountain National Military Park, to commemorate the Battle of Kings Mountain, in which the Patriots defeated the Loyalists, if you will, in the great efforts of the Revolutionary War, which Thomas Jefferson indicated was the turning point in our struggle for independence. Dr. James asked that I share with you briefly my views and challenges facing our national parks. Indeed, challenges facing the National Park Service in providing the care, the appropriate use of our nation's resources. First, allow me to offer my vision for the National Park Service, which is threefold. And this is a vision which I conveyed personally and in writing to the United States Senate Subcommittee on Energy and Natural Resources during my confirmation hearing, which was an enjoyable experience, I might add. I had the distinct pleasure of being the first candidate for the position of the Director of the National Park Service to be subject to Senate confirmation, a legislative requirement passed this past November signed into law by President Clinton, requiring that the director be subject to Senate confirmation before he or she could be appointed by the President of the United States. The threefold vision that I have outlined is, first, that the natural, cultural, and recreational resources entrusted to the care of the National Park Service are protected, preserved, and facilities are maintained at the highest level of quality possible, and that this be achieved through a highly skilled, dedicated, motivated, and diverse staff using prudent financial management, sustainable design, state-of-the-art technology, and partnerships. We must couple that with a continued increase in intergovernmental and community relations. With respect to resource preservation, we are in the midst of some major developments, such as restoring the Everglades in terms of fresh water flowing into the glades, bison management in Yellowstone, flood recovery in the Yosemite Valley, major projects underway for the preservation of the Lincoln and Jefferson Memorial and the Washington Monument. And Regional Director Belson assured me, ladies and gentlemen, for the 6 National Park Service areas in the state of South Carolina, they will epitomize as the highest of quality. And Jerry is here. You may just want to touch base with him to make sure that he'll attest to that as well. The other is that our programs and services and facilities are available for the benefit of the broadest spectrum of the park visitors possible, with assurances of services available for the benefit of our youth and citizens with disabilities. And lastly, that the National Park Service become the most efficient, effective, and respected agency in the federal government. Today, the National Park Service is responsible for 375 areas, extending from the South Pacific from Maine, Alaska, to the U.S. Virgin Islands. We administer within the park system 83 million acres and serve some 265 million visits annually. And we operate with a staff of approximately 20,000 permanent, temporary, and seasonal employees and an annual budget of $1.6 billion. In our day-to-day work, we have, and proudly so, the services of over 90,000 individual volunteers and the assistance of friends groups, partnership organizations, and a wide range of park supporters. In addition to managing the 375 areas, we also have responsibilities in working with states and their political subdivisions and nonprofit and profit organizations in preserving this nation's resources. We provide technical assistance and, in some instances, as authorized by Congress, financial assistance to states and their political subdivision in furthering, again, the preservation of our nation's heritage. The American people are truly proud and supportive of their national parks and other programs of which the National Park Service is responsible. This year we celebrate the 125th anniversary of the nation's first national park, indeed the first national park in the world, Yellowstone National Park, established by an act of Congress in 1872. So moving from one park 125 years ago, we now administer 375. On this coming October the 18th, I will join with Vice President Gore in dedicating a memorial, a national memorial, to honor all women who have served in some form or other in the military actions of this country, stemming from the Revolutionary War through Desert Storm. That unit, once accepted by Vice President Gore shortly after the dedication ceremony on October 18th, will become the perpetual responsibility of your National Park Service, again adding another unit to the system. I should add that within those 375 areas, 62, I believe, 62 were added to the system under the sterling leadership of Director George B. Hartzog. So hopefully that additional workload will be a part of our mission to take care of. Yet, in the midst of the American people caring for their national parks and other programs, we are confronted with some difficulties. We are confronted with many challenges and decisions that will affect the immediate as well as the long-term preservation of our national parks. In response to these challenges and opportunities for improvement in our stewardship responsibilities, we have established the following priorities: planning and protection of park resources, including inventorying, monitoring, and the application of science in our decision-making; improving the level of awareness and appreciation of the values of our parks on the part of the broadest spectrum of the American public possible, whether they live in New York City or in Boise, Idaho, or in Dallas, Texas, or San Francisco. Every American should have some awareness and some appreciation of their national parks. Assuring that the safety and the health of visitors and employees are at the maximum as they visit or work in their national park. Improving the recruitment, the development, and the supervision of our employees and volunteers, and increasing the diversity in staff and the delivery of programs and services to a diverse audience. Expanding the involvement of youth in the programs of the National Park Service through employment, such as the Youth Conservation Corps, participation in the parks as classroom, and other educational opportunities. As a great educator, a native of South Carolina, born in Maysville, South Carolina, observed in her last will and testament, presented to America in 1955, she admonished us that I leave you a responsibility to our young people. We are proud stewards of a memorial in her honor in the nation's capital, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. We shall also increase cooperative and collaborative relationship with federal, state, and local governments and neighboring communities. And I would elaborate on the importance of the relationship with neighboring communities. Over the past 2 months, I've had an opportunity to visit Yosemite, Glacier National Park in Montana, Teton and Yellowstone, again with Superintendent Lovelace at Kings Mountain, Director Everhart, he still is my director, Superintendent of Blue Ridge Parkway, former director, observing the emerging neighboring communities to park. They are growing by leaps and bounds. I have directed my regional directors, and they in turn the superintendents, that we must develop a regular means of engaging in a two-way dialogue with neighboring communities, civic and business leaders and residents. We must consider the views of many constituencies and make decisions that carefully balance the competing interests while remaining within the statutory purpose of which national parks were established. We cannot succeed in carrying out our mission without working closely with our park neighbors, certainly to listen, but also to inform them of the purpose and policies of which each park was established and must be maintained. An additional objective, improving the effectiveness and the efficiency of the National Park Service through organizational and personal performance and use of prudent financial management. We have recently developed a strategic plan that is in keeping with a recently congressionally authorized mandate that every federal government will develop a strategic plan, and it would be the basis of prioritizing its allocation of resources to meet intended goals and objectives. And I'm proud to say that the National Park Service is one of the leading organizations within the whole of the federal government that has taken to heart the letter and spirit of that congressional mandate. With respect to resource preservation, President Thomas Jefferson once observed that the force and character of our country are dependent upon how we care for our resources. Accordingly, we must protect, we must preserve, and maintain our resources at the highest level possible. President Clinton, in a major environmental speech, April of '96, delivered on the CNO Canal National Historical Park, which has just been ravaged by the floods of 1996 in January and in September, noted that we should carry out an aggressive program, and he so directed that the Secretary of the Interior and the National Park Service need to develop major resource preservation and visitor use programs and projects for improving our stewardship. The plan stipulated, among other things, that we must address visitor transportation systems. We have plans underway to institute such systems at Grand Canyon, Yosemite, and Zion to alleviate the heavy vehicular congestion in those fragile resource areas. We have in place a rather modest but a very effective visitor transportation system at Harpers Ferry National Historical Park in West Virginia. We also have an interpretive transportation system in the greater monumental core of our nation's capital. President Clinton also stipulated that we must recommit ourselves to wilderness management as authorized by Congress, and we're going to recommit ourselves to our stewardship and our actual achievements in wilderness management. Recommit ourselves to the preservation of our historical properties. May they be Fort Sumter, or they may be the Lincoln Memorial, or may they be some of the adobe structures in the Great Southwest. We must work closely with the Department of Transportation, in particular the Federal Aviation Administration, in promulgating regulations that will govern scenic overflights, which has become a major concern, particularly at Grand Canyon and some of our other great scenic parks. And Secretary Babbitt and Secretary Slater of the Department of Transportation have established a interagency committee that will work on that major partnership in formulating regulations governing overflights. Also, President Clinton has proposed a major transportation bill that will nearly double our investment in roads that enable Americans to visit our national parks, and we are urging Congress to pass this bill. And we do have a major need to upgrade roads in many of our national parks. With respect to serving the needs of a changing society, the national park system and the parks themselves speaks forcefully to the rich natural and historical and cultural heritage of this great country. We too recognize the tremendous change in the demographics of our current population and the need, indeed an obligation, to serve a diverse population. We are attempting to address the obligation through improved interpretation, educational, and visitor services programs. As mentioned earlier, we are certainly giving high priority to serving our youth and citizens with disabilities. Congress in November authorized through a major legislative measure the National Park Service to transport young people from neighboring communities into their national parks for the benefit of educational, cultural awareness, and recreational programs. We are committed to serving our youth, and we'll take full advantage of that new authority. We're also increasing our involvement with other federal agencies, state governments, and the tourism industry with respect to providing information to those who have not considered visiting their national parks, so to make sure that every sector of our society has some information about the values and the benefits of a possible visit to their national parks. To this end, with respect to working with the tourist industry, and I know that you have a major program here in tourism, is that the National Park Service recently became a signatory to an approved memorandum of understanding between various federal agencies and the Western State Tourism Policy Council. The quality of services, educational, and recreational experiences by the park visitors is and shall be a high priority for the National Park Service. Let me touch upon something that I think is quite important as we reflect upon, again, the changing demographics of our society, the fact that many of our citizens live in urban or near urban centers. I believe that interpretation and other forms of educational experiences at our national parks can serve to bridge greater understanding between us as citizens in a multicultural society. Managers as well as users of national parks are very much aware that the many values associated with parks, whether they are managed as natural, cultural, recreational, or historical, have value. However, values held by one individual or group may not necessarily be shared by others. Parks, in my view, play a major role in a multicultural society in legitimatizing beliefs and values and giving the currency in this society. This is particularly true of cultural parks, which include most of the historical areas, monuments, and memorials. Each park has an intrinsic value for which it was authorized. Each park, therefore, has a specific benefit to the park user. That benefit is always expressed in personal terms. It could be enjoyment, better understanding of humankind, history, pride, inspiration, education, and perhaps sorrow or anger in regards to parks that relate to human struggle or conflict. Effective and efficient management of park requires the use of professional interpretation, and we are committed to upgrading the professionalism of our interpretation in the National Park Service. But interpretation is a fundamental part of ensuring quality visitor experiences and appreciation of park values. The principal objective of interpretation is to explain or to demonstrate to the visitor the importance of the park and the purpose of which the park was established. An important conclusion in his book, Interpreting Our Heritage, by Freeman Tilden, notes that, I quote, interpretation is an educational activity which aims to reveal meanings and relationships through the use of original objects or resources, rather than simply to communicate factual information. Tilden further observed that whether we call it or not, education or not, the interpreter is still engaged in a kind of education. He further underscored the fact that interpretation aims not to do something to the listener, but to provoke the listener to do something to himself. Therefore, this provocation can be a forceful and positive reminder and an aid in building better intergroup relations when the interpretation is true to history and, as emphasized by Tilden, reveals meaning and relationship. And today we have many areas in the National Park System that truly reflect the rich diversity commemorating women, Native Americans, Hispanic, Asian Americans, African Americans. Many of these areas represent difficulty in the evolution of our freedoms and the rights of man to live comfortably by one's side. A truer understanding of these areas, again in my judgment, will strengthen our resolve to become one nation, one people. Our first National Park Service director perhaps stated it best. Stephen Mather reminded us, and I quote, "He is a better citizen with a keener appreciation of the privilege of living here in the United States who has toured the national parks." We are truly in citizenship building. We are in the business of building better citizens. Dr. James, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you briefly on our national park system and the programs of the National Park Service. I shall look forward to the days and weeks and years to come in working with you here at Clemson University, its fine student body, faculty, administrators, and staff. Director Hartzog, in his thought-provoking, insightful, informational, and inspirational book entitled Battling for National Parks, concludes that, and I quote, "Saving the national parks is a compact between the past and the present. The obligation of the contract is that these inherited treasures shall be passed on unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations." He further states that our generation must not default on this immutable obligation, unquote. In closing, and in response to Director Hartzog's charge, please permit me to share a pledge with you on behalf of the men and women of the National Park Service. In Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, we administer a National Historic Site in honor of Frederick Douglass, who President Lincoln once described as one, if not the most meritorious man he ever met. Although speaking of a different cause in a different period in our nation's history, Mr. Douglass expressed belief that all progress is born of earnest struggle, and that we cannot expect progress without struggle, or in his words, crops without plowing up the ground. In other words, Mr. Douglass acknowledged that the accomplishment of any just cause requires hard work. Indeed, the protection of our natural resources is such a cause. Therefore, the men and women of the National Park Service and our many friends and partners shall keep our hands on the plow in providing for the protection and appropriate use of our nation's resources, our national parks, for this and future generations. That's our pledge. Thank you very much. Yes, under the reauthorization, if you will, of the highway bill, commonly referred to as the IST, there will be a leeway in the authorization that would allow us to develop other transportation modes, if you will, such as bike trails, as well as walking trails or hiking trails. For there are those who live in the urban communities that prefer to take that mode of transportation. Up until recently, there have been some restrictions on the use of those funds, particularly in the urban areas and even some of the areas that are rather remote from urban centers. We have adopted pretty much as a policy that we will consider other modes of transportation such as bike trails and footpath, and that seems to be working out extremely well. I just recently returned from Voyageurs National Park in Minnesota, and the superintendent advised me that there's a linkage between a bike trail that is funded by the state into the park, and the park would pick it up as it's coming to the state. So there has to be a great deal of coordination between the local jurisdiction and the federal park, particularly to accommodate commuters on the bikes or park visitors on the bike who also happen to be commuters, if you will, in some instances. Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate you mentioning that, and I failed to mention that was one of the initiatives in President Clinton's Earth Day message April a year ago, is that Congress has authorized a comprehensive 3-year fee demonstration program that allows the National Park Service to introduce fees in parks or programs which heretofore had not had a fee, as well as to increase fees at existing fee parks, if you will. And Congress had some stipulations that we could retain a percentage of the fees collected and allocate those fees to specific park projects for improvements. But Congress also, and this was quite insightful, also directed the Park Service as well as the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Service and others who benefit from this legislation, that we would gather information from the public, both those who visit the parks and those who potentially would visit the park, about their views relative to fees, whether or not they might be discouraging visitors, or the fees are too high or they're too low, and compile an analysis of the public's comment and file that with Congress as well. We will be submitting our first year's report to Congress in January, and we have 2 additional reports to submit to them for the balance of the experimental program. What I have been able to determine based on my own interaction with the public as well as the reports I received, that the American public feel comfortable in paying fees, either at the entrance gate or for campground and what have you, with some assurances by their government that their fees can be directly applied towards enhancing park facilities. So it remains to be seen as to the conclusions that Congress will draw from the 3-year experiences. But my sense is that Congress will give not only the National Park Service but other land management agency permanent authority to carry out the fee program. And it seems to be headed in that direction. Let me just add another dimension to my response, is that we will continue to, and it's a strong obligation that I share, to make the needs of the National Park Service known through the normal appropriation process. But there is general agreement between the Congress and the administration that those agencies that have the opportunity to generate revenues for services provided, such as fees or campground activities, there'll be fees in addition to the appropriation, plus we will continue to broaden our involvement of partnerships, either as volunteers or those who prefer to just make a cash donation. So fees, I think, will be with us. Yes? That's very current. I mean, that's high on the radar screen, right? And winter use is being considered or debated at Voyages as well, with the tremendous growth or the increase in snowmobile or winter use of our national parks. And I don't believe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, anyone would have had any idea that winter use, particularly in the Grand Teton and Yellowstone, would increase to the extent that it have. We're in the process now of carrying out an environmental study to determine what should the balance be between that level of winter use and with any potential adverse disturbance of the winter activities of the wildlife in the parks. And also, there are budget considerations. We traditionally have geared up budget-wise within Yellowstone, as an example, or Grand Teton, to accommodate the heavy visitor season, say May through September, and then do a lot of repair and this kind of thing during the winter. But now we're finding that those parks are becoming year-round parks in terms of the summer use and the winter use. So internally we have to adjust. But we have an obligation, as I pointed out here, to make sure that any kind of activity that's permitted, regardless of what time of year it is, that is done consistent with the Park Service policies and the Organic Act establishing that specific park, and make some hard decisions as to what can be permitted and what cannot be permitted. And that evolves into a lot of controversy, and we have to make some hard decisions. Yes?
Speaking of controversy, there's been a lot of attention paid recently to the rather expensive facility built in Pennsylvania, and I'm wondering if you have any input into that situation.
A great deal. Yeah, great deal. Yeah. And she posed that question with a beautiful smile on her face. You're still a friend of mine. Yes, I mentioned it's one of my visions that the National Park Service should become the most effective, efficient, and respected agency in the government. And as one of the TV ads reads, respectability is earned. With respect to recent news coverage on the comfort facility at Delaware Water Gap and housing in Yosemite, I have had an opportunity to review some of the circumstances, not all, and I've asked for some background information. In the interim, however, I have put in place some requirements that will give me a level of comfort, asking that the superintendents, through their regional director, make sure that whatever takes place through the use of appropriated as well as donated dollars are consistent with our measures to assure that we are utilizing the funds in an appropriate way and that we can ensure the public trust of our capabilities. I don't know all the circumstances with respect to level of approval, extenuated circumstances that led up to the cost associated with the comfort facility, which I believe was completed in '96. and some of the housing in Yosemite, I believe, maybe a year ago or a year less. But I have issued instructions to the leadership of the National Park Service that I personally will be monitoring, if you will, major construction projects throughout the National Park Service to assure again that vision that I outlined is in fact not only rhetoric but indeed is substantively. Yes.
As a follow-up to the key question.
Yes.
To what degree do you fear that you may be compelled to replace other funding sources with those fees as opposed to being able to supplement?
That is a recurring question. Sometimes we speak about it, sometimes we don't. Is whether or not that if we are able to generate and the American public buys into the fee program, whether or not it become in our vernacular an offset of appropriation as opposed to an enhancement of the appropriation. We'll continue discussing the merits of the fee program in that context with the leadership of Congress, as well as the leadership of the administration, Office of Management and Budget, because the intent is that it does not become an offset, but it allows us to expand upon those objectives outlined to enhance the quality of visitor services, enhance how we take care of the facilities, the resources entrusted to our care. But that is always a little fear, right? Dr. James, as you're coming forward, I would ask one thing of you, and many of my colleagues in the Park Service perhaps can recite this as well, but it's an observation made by a young president who had a great deal to do with the leadership of the Department of Interior. And he also, as the case of President Clinton, selected as his Secretary of the Interior an Arizonian. But it was my great fortune to receive the direct leadership and support of Director Hartzog, who carried out many of the programs that were put in place by that young president and was carried on by a fellow native son, if you will, of my home state, Texas. And I would just like to express that observation as a salute to, again, my hero, Director Hartzog. And it was President Kennedy who observed that I am certain that when the dust of centuries has passed over our cities, we too will be remembered, not for our victories or defeats in battles or in politics, but rather for our contributions to the human spirit. Thank you, Director Hartzog, for your contributions.
Old friends, thank you both for being here with us today. Director Stanton, we commend you for your lofty goals that you've set forth, and we think you're the man to do them. We at Clemson, both as citizens and as natural and social scientists, support you, and we're here to help. Let us know how we may help you. We have some distinguished visitors I'd like to recognize. From the Southeast Park Directors Conference. We're glad that you're meeting with us in Clemson and had this opportunity to join us this afternoon. And to students, faculty, and guests, we invite all of you to join one another in the lobby and meet Dr. Hartzog and Director Stanton and have some refreshments before you wend your ways back. Thank you for your contributions to making this a very successful Hartzog lecture. We welcome you back again next year.